Best advice for a CISO. Go.
The intentional framing of security as a peer to other quality dimensions like reliability and performance, things like this. And what does this mean? It means that security is seen as a peer. You don't automatically get first place because your issue is a security one. It's one that needs to be considered in the broader context of what the organization is trying to deliver, which is typically a quality and good.
It's time to begin the CISO Series podcast.
Welcome to the CISO Series podcast. My name is David Spark. I am the producer of the CISO Series, and joining me as my co-host, it's the principal of Duha, Andy Ellis. Andy, say hello to the audience.
Buenas tardes, o según cuando se encuentre en el mundo, buenos días o buenas noches.
For those of you, I'm sure you all picked up, that was Spanish. Our guest is actually a bilingual speaker, and that Spanish is her first language. I will introduce her in just a moment. We are available, though, at CISOseries.com. If you have not checked out our other programming, please do. We've got 4 other shows on the network. Our sponsor for today's episode is GuardSquare Mobile Application Protection. Yes, your mobile devices need protection and the applications that run on them, and you need to be developing them correctly. More about that later in the show. But Andy, I want to discuss with you a conversation I had at a dinner. I met someone who is not an accountant, not a financial manager, but what he does is totally legal.
Okay, this sounds sketchy already the way you framed it.
So, and the gentleman who invited me to the dinner, he was his client. And I just found that phrase totally legal when describing your own work hysterical, because imagine using it for your job. The last thing it sounds like is legal, doesn't it?
Right.
Just say, while I record a podcast, it's totally legal.
It was totally legal. I think we should run with actually, maybe we should have a podcast, add to the CISO series thing called Totally Legal.
I just thought that phrase imbues the exact opposite of trust.
It definitely does. But I think it'd be a fascinating, we'll have, advice that is technically legal, but probably not a good idea for CISOs on the Totally Legal podcast.
Right. I just thought anyone who has to describe their work in the very first sentence of describing it as totally legal, maybe somebody you don't want to do work with. Yeah.
Maybe a problem there. Or it might be somebody's found a great corner case where they're exploiting the system in a legal fashion and you can get away with it until the IRS catches up.
Right. Totally legal for today.
I remember sitting with somebody, an IRS auditor at a law enforcement conference, and he said that one of the things that they do is every year they go through every tax return, automated fashion, and just basically do a counter of every tax rule that is referenced, and they look for deltas. So if all of a sudden there's this uptick of some weird arcane corner rule that nobody was ever using, and over 3 years everybody's using it, they're like, somebody found an exploit, we got to go fix it.
I'm down with it. I told my kids that if anybody asks them what their dad does for a living at school, just say it's totally legal.
It's totally legal.
It's totally legal.
He spends all of his time with a microphone, but it's totally legal.
Microphone. He locks the door. It's totally legal.
Yeah.
All right, let's bring in our guest, who you hear her giggling in the background there. I believe in Spanish she was doing that. She's the la jefa, or presidente, of Security Tinkerers. Thrilled that she's joining us, Julie Davila. Julie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, David. I'm excited to be here.
Are we creating more problems?
Quote, most security teams I talk to are focused on the wrong problem, end quote. That's Ross Young of CISO Tradecraft, who draws a hard line between 2 questions. How do we get developers to care more about security versus how do we make it structurally impossible for insecure code to ship undetected without adding weeks to the development cycle? So the first is a culture problem. It takes years. The second is a systems problem that can be solved architecturally. So if the culture conversation is a distraction from a structural fix that's within reach Where do you start? Andy, I will begin with you. Is making insecure code architecturally impossible to ship without detection practically achievable? What do you think?
Not today, for the same reasons that the other option is also not solvable. I think Ross is absolutely onto something here, which is the model that we have of try to get the developers to care about security from outside, where we define care about security as listen to the security expert, which is a bad definition, by the way, is there because security is not part of development. Development ships code. That's their job. So if you want to say ship code that is safe, that's a development task, not a security task. And so coming at it from this outside has always been our problem, because the entire business believes it's the CISO's responsibility to make sure code doesn't ship unsafely. And yet we have no ability to interact with that other than through convincing developers to do the right thing. And I put giant air quotes for those of you who can't hear it. So I think what we actually need to do is get to a point where we say, hey, heads of engineering, it is your responsibility. Here are tools that will help. But in the same way that you don't know any development teams that ship code with known basic bugs. If they basically detect a bug in QA that's oh, you're going to have this weird, crazy thing, they just go fix it. Why is that not the case for security? Because they've kicked security out of the software release lifecycle. It needs to go back in and not be a security discipline. It's, as our cold intro points out, it's a basic quality discipline, and we have not been treating it as one.
I agree with Andy here, but I'd sort of take a little bit of a different lens to the problem, right? For me, the culture thing, I think it's important and I think it's work, but I think it moves slow, right? But it needs to happen, but it's not the thing that's gonna make a difference tomorrow, right? At the same time, there's a thing that's uncomfortable to a lot of people is around this topic of secure code. I think secure code is often not the thing that leads to real incidents. So what do I mean by this, right? When I was at GitLab, for instance, one of the examples, and I spoke about this to one of our vendors, was that if I were to take all of our incident data over the past 2 years, only one of them, kind of like an S3, was an incident related to a code flaw that could have been detected by a scanner or some kind of secure review process. Whereas the bigger challenge is components that behave as you designed them to, but in concert can produce bad outcomes. And this is where it gets a little bit tricky, right? And then from a secure code perspective, it's less about getting to a place where you ship code that is impenetrable. I actually think that's fundamentally unachievable. I think there's always going to be some non-zero amount of flaws that can be exploited. And it's really about sort of containing the blast radius. So even if the code is flawed, what's the bad outcome you can actually affect? And a lot of those constraints, I think, can happen at the infrastructure layer or at a more sort of guardrail level where developers, they should care about security, but what if they didn't have to or not as much? Then I think you start addressing things more structurally, more systematically than really trying to address one of many symptoms that go into producing bad outcomes.
But hasn't this discussion of structurally fixing code or structurally fixing the pipeline, this has been around since the beginning of this whole discussion. Yes, Andy?
Oh, absolutely. This has always been a conversation, but I want to actually pull something up so we don't lose it, which is we spend all of our time talking about software patches and vulnerability management, which is not the interesting discipline here. Right? Julie just brought up what happens when everything's working as designed and yet it still causes problems? Or the other architectural flaws, we have created a generation of security professionals who are basically street sweepers. It's oh, look, we know what software defects look like because we get told that there's a bug that's known in this piece of software, rather than people who are truly architects walking around going, that building is going to collapse under the wrong situation. And that's where the really cool security work is finding those defects and fixing them.
They didn't think that through all the way, did they?
Well, what works for a cloud-native startup fails spectacularly at an enterprise with decades of legacy systems. That's you, Julie. You built the Software Factory Security Framework after running into the same wall at NASA and at GitLab. Hire more people, and it still does not scale. Your framework positions organizations on two axes: operational complexity and readiness, with different playbooks for each quadrant. And you've got two core principles: context matters more than best practices, and security scales through strategic investment, not just headcount. Julie, can you give me examples of both here?
Absolutely. So On the topic of best practices and where context can sometimes overwrite that, when I had my startup, we went through the FedRAMP process and everything. One of our claims to fame is that we did everything serverless, right? There was no raw compute that we managed or orchestrated. It was all Lambdas and managed things from public cloud. One of these things was our database. We had a database cluster, Postgres compatibility, and access to it was not through the network. We actually completely blocked ingress and egress at the network level. All of the access happened through AWS's backplane, through assumed roles and that sort of a thing. So interactivity between the database and say like Lambda was not happening over the network as AWS backplane. What does this mean in practice in the face of something like FedRAMP? That means to stand up a database scanner, you would have to spin up some raw compute and point it at a database that you actually don't control just to satisfy a dogmatic interpretation of FedRAMP controls, right? So this is one where best practice says scan your database regularly for things that are wrong with it. But the reality of our context was that what we had developed was something that was more secure than the best practices because of the specific nuance of how authentication and authorization was happening between our app server, if you will, in this case Lambda, and our database technology. So there's one example here. And the second piece, I'll take an example out of GitLab. Like so many AppSec teams, my AppSec org, which is one of several teams that rolled up to me, was overwhelmed. And then with the pivot towards AI, even more so, right? And our bug bounty program, same thing. There was a lot of overwhelm. The idea of catching up was sort of unattainable, even from a bug bounty perspective. We regularly had 50 submissions in queue week over week. So what do we do about it, right? What we did internally was artificially constrain what we could do. So for a quarter, what AppSec could previously do in the previous quarter was sort of like sharded by a third, right? So only 2/3 of previous capacity was now available, allocating 1/3 to scaling or automation investments. In this case, creating an LLM-based workflow around how we handled a lot of our bug bounty triage and a lot of the sinks over time, which is that context collection, getting the right data to make the right recommendations in terms of what engineering needs to fix what, et cetera, right? So this idea of being like, we're going to do less, right, in terms of the eyes of the business for a quarter, so we can allocate that capacity to a thing that will allow us to scale up and meet the business where it needs us to be, is that non-headcount investment to drive growth and sustainability organizationally.
All right. Andy was specifically your first example, was sort of laughing so much that he fell off the screen.
Yeah. Julie, when you said a dogmatic interpretation of FedRAMP controls, is the first person to take, or my team really did the work, but to take FedRAMP to a commercial off-the-shelf system. Like the first 6 people to get FedRAMP certified, 5 of them built a data center in which they put their whole cloud. And it was Akamai who took our production systems through FedRAMP. It was nothing but fighting the dogmatic interpretations. Like I remember the knockdown drag out fight we had over humidity sensors. They're like, what do you mean you don't have humidity sensors in your data center? I was like, we're in like 2000. I don't care. There's somebody else who cares about humidity. I'm not going to worry about it. But this whole point of like, it's a very different problem in a fast-moving tech startup. And we weren't even cloud native because we were pre-cloud. In a sense, we were one of the very first clouds. But we could do a lot of things that others couldn't do. And I still remember I was on a panel at the very first B-Sides SF. And I forget what I said. I made some comment about, dealing with this is pretty easy. And somebody in the audience, it was JJ Bonella, basically says, you have never had to deal with your PBX doing recording for voicemail where somebody calls in and leaves their credit card as voicemail, and now that's constrained by PCI. And I was just sitting there, and to me, it's always just been like those of us who have this luxury of working in the big tech world, we sometimes forget that there are small and medium-sized businesses that work in a very different framework. And it's sort of, you get these blinders on where you forget that the problem is way bigger and way smaller than you can see.
Mobile apps used to sit outside the CISO's remit, a product team's feature running alongside the real business built on web and back office systems. That approach is out of date. Today, mobile is driving the business for a growing number of banks, fintechs, retailers, and other industries. But security oversight hasn't moved at the same pace. Risk ownership is often murky, and the defenses CISOs assume are in place don't always survive real scrutiny. Join former AT&T CISO and founder of Tag Cyber, Ed Amoroso, and Ryan Lloyd, the Chief Product Officer over at GuardSquare, on September 15th, 2026, for a candid discussion about what's really happening inside mobile AppSec programs today and the questions every security leader should be asking their teams. Together, they'll walk through the questions security leaders should be asking about the apps driving their revenue, reputation, and growth. Register for the webinar and discover more about how GuardSquare provides industry-leading security for your mobile apps at guardsquare.com/CISO. That's GUARD, Guard, Square, SQUARE.com/CISO for the event happening on September 15th, 2026.
It's time to play What's Worse?
Julie, you know how to play this game, correct?
I think so.
Yeah, it's just two really crappy scenarios, and you have to tell me which one is the worst of the two. And our wonderful listeners send in these scenarios. By the way, please send in more. We always need good ones. I'm always hunting for the best, most creative, toughest one possible. I'm hoping this falls into that category. It always is distressing when Andy goes, "Oh, this is easy." But
Yeah, well, sometimes they are.
But Julie, I would like you to know that I love it when people disagree with Andy. So no pressure. All right. I make Andy answer first, so you get to agree or disagree with it.
Okay, I'm in. Let's do it.
All right, Andy. This comes from Craig George of GuidePoint Security. Craig is unfortunately given two first names with Craig George.
Why is that unfortunate? That just means he has multiple choices when people ask him for his name on his coffee.
When people go, George, and then somebody whose name is George turns their head. No, I was talking to Craig George.
Well, I think it's fascinating that both of his names have an additional letter to a geographical feature. He could be a Crag Gorge, but he's just added in extra vowels.
I don't think he's ever thought about that. But Craig, message us to let us know if you have.
Maybe not, but I can't help but do it. I see words and that's what happens.
All right. Here is Craig's what's worse scenarios. It is, I would say, early truth versus late blame. This is the theme of it.
Oh, fascinating.
First scenario, you're raising a clear security concern early. You're documenting it and being asked to create a policy or formal risk exception so leadership can knowingly ignore it. Now, everyone else in the company sees it and feels slighted. Okay? Not good.
Feels slighted about what? That I documented?
I added this part. Don't blame Craig George on it.
Okay. Just wanted to
I'm
check.
throwing it in.
Then what did you mean when you added it?
I added it in because it's a risk exception. They feel slighted. Either it's something just for the executives, or it could be something that they feel is a major issue and they feel that it should be taken.
Okay. Sufficiently vague, but I'm going to have to take issue with that later. But
just say that the rest of the office is seeing what's going on. Okay.
Okay.
Second scenario, you're sitting in a post-incident review explaining why no one connected the dots when the risk was already accepted in writing. So the situation is one makes you unpopular early, the other makes you responsible later. So which scenario is worse? Do you want to be unpopular at the beginning, or you want to be responsible on the back end?
So this one's a little bit weird because I have two different answers.
It's essentially the same scenario.
Well, no, it's a different scenario because one is pre-incident, one is post-incident.
Okay.
And the advantage is that in one sense I just say, look, I would rather have the first scenario because I didn't get an incident.
That's true.
Right? Like, look, because the second scenario includes the first. Look, you did document it. It was signed off or whatever that means.
But I argue in the traditional sense, correct, you do not have an incident. But I would say in the first scenario, you have an incident that the rest of the company does not like security so much, given what's going on.
What I'm trying to figure out, why did they not have the same reaction in the second scenario? If we documented it and it was signed off, like that is the first scenario. Like this is what I'm trying to figure out is this one actually feels like one scenario is a superset of the other one. And I'm trying to figure out how they're separate. Because if they're a superset.
They are kind of supersets. I mean, yes.
Then the second one is clearly worse because we had an incident. Has nothing to do with when we document. But let's pretend for a moment that these are different, which is in the second case, it was like, it's written down, but we didn't have this stupid like risk acceptance policy where somebody had to sign off on it. So there's no real I told you so moment in the second one. Whereas the first one, you're going to create an I told you so moment later, and you're making people hate you because they have to like do all this crazy documentation that doesn't ever move the needle. Right. And I think a lot of security teams feel that they're in this boat. And I've talked to a lot of security professionals that are like, oh, you should document, you should write it down so that later. And that's a bad world. So I'm going to go with this interpretation. And so I get to constrain Julie to this interpretation. Well, these are not superset. These are very separate. The first one is worse because there is no opportunity for learning. And you're driving the security team into a corner where they will more and more be not listened to. In the second one, you get listened to after the fact. People will have to learn. So it's going to create a cycle where there is an opportunity for learning from failure, because there is going to be failure. So I'm going to take that interpretation. I don't think I violated the near rule by rewriting this and say that the first one is worse.
I'm cool. I'm cool with your answers. All right, Julie.
Yeah, I can take a little bit of a counterpoint. I think for the same reasons kind of Andy pointed out at the beginning, the second one is like, what's the incident? Does it impact users, right? Like depending on like what kind of org you are, maybe that causes like actual harm, in which case like, no, well that would be worse, even if organizationally it's better from a learning experience. If it can be avoided, then well, we should, right? And I think very much if the business wants to accept the risk like that, I mean, the security in an ideal world like doesn't own it. We're essentially responsible for the presentation layer to the business of like, here's the reality. If you want to ship it, here's the 2-sentence regular layman interpretation of what risk you're accepting. Like, are you cool with it or not? If you're cool with it, okay, C-suite, like do care, fiduciary duty, that's on you to decide if this is what you want to go with. And if so, great, we'll document it, we'll note it, and we'll move on and we'll revisit this for anything that is undergoing treatment that maybe takes a few quarters to pan out, and then I think that first option is a little bit better in that sense.
All right. So
if you find yourself in this world, and I'm happy with Julie disagreeing with me on this one because it's a very strangely constrained one. A thing I recommend, which we did for our product security reviews after a while, because we got into this boat where like security would write down the risk. So we just said, look, pass or fail. Pass means the product manager put the risk in their slides when they brief their boss. That's it. And the boss would look at us and say, is that an accurate summary of the risk? And we would say yes or no. And a no was a failing grade. If we said that's not accurate, then the president of the product line would be like, that's unacceptable, go back and figure it out. But he would say it to the product manager, not to us. And so what we did was we transferred the responsibility for documenting the risk to them. They took a lot less risk at that point because they believed it. It wasn't just a check the box exercise of security writing it down. It was they had to write it and they had to brief it.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, right? I think ultimately, like, who owns the decision making out of business in terms of like what are you going to do of a given product, and it's going to look a little bit differently, between like an Akamai, a GitLab, a cloud, like they're all going to operate like a little bit differently, but how you actually shard out the responsibility of like owning the decision, I think is ultimately the right play, as you say.
Yeah.
Andy, you said you were okay with Julie disagreeing with you. So you're not okay with all the other people who have disagreed with you?
Well, many times not. In this case, the challenge was this one was vaguely worded enough that how we each interpreted the scenario, I think, was a valid interpretation, but we had very different interpretations that we then make a different choice from. Sometimes I have people who disagree. We've had people disagree, not in a while, so I'm not going to name any names, but not a recent guest, where I was listening to their disagreement and I was just like, that is just crazy talk.
You've never said that to one of our guests. I've never heard you say that's crazy talk.
One was a vendor, so I was very careful, a sponsor. So I didn't want to say that like on a sponsor,
Oh, well, that I do remember. Yes, I do remember you being at odds with one.
It also could just be that we're fond of each other. We've been friends for a little bit now, Andy. So, there's a little bit of a bias in there.
That's true. We've been friends for a while. So also, I know that Julie could kick my ass if need be. So I've got to be very careful. She'll bring out her hockey stick.
Oh, yeah, Julie plays hockey. Don't meet with her on the ice.
I play a lot of hockey, Andy. That's true.
Managing security changes for business optimization.
Quote, CISOs end up with accountability without control, end quote. When it comes to infrastructure, that's the structural problem Ross Haliluk is tracking as more security leaders absorb infrastructure teams. He argues the line between security and infrastructure was always artificial. When the team that defines risk is separate from the team building and running the systems that create it, it's misalignment by design. Ownership starts to look like the only logical fix. But how does taking on more make the CISO's job easier? more scope, more headcount, more competing priorities inside one function? Julie, how do we change how organizations treat infrastructure and security so they better operate as elements of each other rather than just reporting to the same person? What do you think?
Yeah, good. This is a really important topic, and I think it's going to depend on the organization, right? And I think security owning infra is probably going to work for kind of the SMB side of the market more than it's going to work a little bit up market with like larger platform providers and the sort, right? Like how are you going to have like a security team owning like how you package and distribute software for like on-prem customers and like handle that, and like are you going to have a security team that also owns your Kubernetes stack and how they handle the Istio mesh on top of like, probably not. Those are specialized functions, and GitLab is like a whole division of just like infrastructure engineering and shouldn't be. But I think the thing that matters more is what is the value stream that you're actually trying to optimize for. And what is a value stream? Like how quickly, how efficiently you're able to provide end value to your customers, whether internal or external or both. And like where in that value stream do you see the most amount of defects, the most amount of lag? And then how do you organize your org to fix that? And in some, it might be that infra does go under security, but in many others, it won't be. Ultimately, it's like, how do you provide that value in a way that sustains the level of quality that the organization is implicitly or explicitly promising to the end users? And I think that is the thing to optimize for, not kind of this ownership model of like who owns what, or like how do we allocate capacity. I think that's sort of after the fact. I think the thing that really matters is how you're actually producing and delivering that value at scale in a way that meets the quality expectations of the customer.
Andy, your take on this. Good answer, by the way, Julie.
Yeah, so I think that it's a fascinating challenge. And partly, I think that the CISO, the security organization, should be an operational team. And you just have to figure out where you're drawing those lines. I'm seeing more and more CISOs who are CIOs. Why does this make sense? Because in a cloud native organization, the CIO's responsibility has stopped being about deploying big applications and managing IT change, and has been basically a support team. Like, we're going to give you laptops and install security software on them. We're going to help you turn on SaaS and integrate it with our security stack. So there, it makes a lot of sense to tie that together with a security function. And I think our challenge is that there really are three different security functions, and we put those together, and that actually is a bigger problem than what else you integrate it with. And the core three I think of as past, present, and future. Past is compliance. Are the things that we said we would do still true today? And that's basically a very important sort of documentation and guardrail function. Stop drift is hard, serious problem, but it sort of works at a very slow, steady pace. It's present, security operations, like somebody's breaking in where the guards who have to go deal with that problem, that often then grows into weirder operational tasks like, oh, we have to find all the vulnerabilities and tell somebody to fix them. Doesn't work at the same timeline. That's, I think, is a problem. And then the third, which I think is the coolest one, partly because that's where I started, we think of as future, security architecture. How are you building for the future? And oftentimes that makes more sense embedded inside a product or inside an engineering organization. But ideally, you want to think about like, how do these work together and what are natural adjacencies into the rest of your organization? And I think the theme of this podcast, this episode, has basically been organizations are not the same. At different scales, at different types, these answers are not going to be universal. What worked for an Akamai or a GitLab is not necessarily going to work for, Dave's Blinds to Go in Florida.
By the way, we're selling blinds like crazy. This goes back to your whole thing about context, Julie.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I agree with what Andy's saying, especially kind of the future thing, right? And I think the world of AI hype that we live in now, I think is really shining a spotlight on all of the fun architectural debt that organizations have accumulated. You throw agents into the mix, and now it's really obvious where your gaps are, right? And I think for a lot of organizations, they're having to have these like periods of a sustained risk while they're doing these architectural improvements. They have a real set of market pressures to deliver, and oftentimes they're delivering on top of primitives that were built for a time where things were largely at human speed, some level of automation, and now they don't really have that slack. So they're kind of having to do both things in parallel. Of like, we have to compete, we have to go to market, but at the same time, we have these very real architectural hurdles, sometimes projects that take multiple years that we need to address. So then how do we do that in a way that's most responsible? And this is where, and to Andy's point, having your architectural game well polished will serve you well.
Do you trust this LLM?
Quote, that's not an AI agent. That's an insider threat you built on purpose, end quote. That's Caleb Sema take on Simon Willison's test for exploitability of AI agents. This breaks down to three aspects. The agent has access to private data, exposure to untrusted input, and the ability to take actions. Now, most enterprise agents hit all three on day one, and the engineering teams building them already know it. Caleb suggested an audit checklist before putting agents in production, such as auditing what an agent remembers and if an orchestrator can instruct sub-agents with requests they'd reject from a human. So, Andy, I will begin with you. Where do human checkpoints sit in your agentic architecture? And are audits like this feasible when the incentive is always to move as fast as possible?
So I just want to start by saying Caleb has summarized this beautifully with the insider threat you built on purpose. If you walk through what your like dream or nightmare insider threat would be like, some foreign agent has been inside my company for 10 years and has accumulated permissions, and what's the worst thing they could do? You will not even remotely touch how badly AIs are going to hurt you. Because humans naturally don't do certain things. And, Jason Bourne inside your infrastructure is not the norm. But just think about this simple thing. Like, you have an agent, you install it on your desktop. It simultaneously has the ability to read your private keys and to send email. This was an example a vendor recently gave me. And you're like, no human will send their private keys over email. Well, okay, a few will, but in general, not going to happen. But that's the sort of thing that common sense, like, I don't mix this and that humans are actually really good at. And 99.99% of the time, they're never going to break sort of this wall in their head. AIs are going to break them all the time. I think that where Caleb goes, I think, slightly off is he starts thinking like, how do we defend the AI against input? And I think that's the wrong way to approach it. I think we have to defend the AI against being able to do certain things. Right? That it should never send your private keying materials, whether it thought it was a good idea or got a prompt injection to convince it to do so. We shouldn't try to solve the prompt injection problem. We should try to stop the using different permissions that collide in bad ways. Like, that's what I think we'd be better off solving. That said, this is a really hard problem. And we need to think about, like, what are the architectural ways we're going to protect ourselves from these AIs that have no common sense and no conscience and no set of morals. None of the things that humans bring to the table that keep them from just accidentally blowing us up. Like, the AIs don't have any of those guardrails inside.
All right, Julie, I believe you have a few of those guardrails, yes?
Yeah, I agree completely on this one. Prompt injection, I think, is fundamentally unsolvable. This is something we took our own stab at this at GitLab. We spent a considerable amount of resources with some partners to try and get false positive rates down to an acceptable amount at platform scale, these sorts of things. And that clearly wasn't going to work for us in anything approximating blocking mode from prompt injections at scale when you have things like comments and artifacts and descriptions and user input and all these things, right? So then what is the fix? It's constraining what can be done, even if the agent itself can be convinced of something, even if fully convinced, what can it actually do with its intent post that sway that you have on the agent, right? And I think what that looks like is where does it run? If you have agents running on worker nodes, right? Like, what can that worker node do? Does it, by virtue of the network that it's on, can it only access X, Y, and Z thing? Then great. Then you kind of, you limit the blast radius there, right? Like, is this a thing that can modify comments and do other, to Andy's point around send an email and also read your private keys? Like, that probably shouldn't be the same agent. And I think we also saw this very recently with Meta and the Instagram attack issue, where they kind of violated this concept, right? Where they had an agent that could do too many things and was subject to being convinced to doing the wrong thing and having the mechanisms to doing the wrong thing as a part of its underlying architecture. And that's where the problems lie. So I think this sort of idea of just constraining and attenuation at the agent action level is really, I think, what the industry at large is starting to coalesce around. It's like, we're not going to be able to stop prompt injections, but we can stop the blast radius.
Well, that brings us to the tail end of this show. I want to thank you, Julie, and I want to thank you, Andy. And I also want to thank our sponsor, and that is GuardSquare. And make sure you sign up for their event happening on September 15th, 2026. Learn all about mobile AppSec programs today. All you have to do is go to guardsquare.com/CISO. It is spelled just the way it sounds, GUARDSQUARE.com/CISO for the September 15th, 2026 event. Now, Julie, I'm going to let you have the last word, but I believe two things. One is a number of people listening to this episode are members of the Security Tinkerers, and I'd like you to explain the Security Tinkerers to this audience and how others could be part of the group.
Yeah, sure. So Security Tinkerers, it's a hodgepodge mix of really ambitious, really kind, really friendly human beings, typically senior cyber folks, though we have folks that don't necessarily fit that bill. That's kind of the general pedigree from all sorts of different domains and backgrounds, from enterprise to startups and the sort. And we all sort of coalesce around this idea of like, we're in it together, right? In terms of this broader security narrative that we're all in as we try to make things better for the industry and the world. And what does this look like, right? At things at different events like Black Hat, RSA, the works. We'll oftentimes meet up informally. We'll discuss each other. We have some just internal social support work because as a CISO, you're sort of constantly under pressure. You have work pressure, you have family pressure, and oftentimes this can kind of create a reality where you kind of feel kind of lonely. So Security Tinkerers kind of provides this community, this home for folks to be able to solve hard problems, contribute back to communities, and also help each other out with both personal and professional challenges that we kind of all face as security leaders in this really rapidly evolving world.
And how does one apply?
On the membership side, it's a little bit Fight Clubby in the sense of you can't just apply. Typically, somebody from the community has to have worked with the person that then they nominate and say like, hey, this person fits the mold. They have a really strong trajectory career-wise. They're really ambitious. They're really friendly, and they're probably going to be a net add to this community. What do you all think? And then we have a nomination process where we do that, and hopefully we try to meet them at whatever security event happens.
So it's just like a fraternity.
It is kind of like that.
Well, sorority is in my
Or sorority.
Fraternity, sorority, whatever way you want to put it.
Yeah. And entertainingly, all of the prompts today, except for the what's worse, everybody there was a tinkerer.
Oh, good point. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, I caught that as I was prepping. I'm like, I know all these people.
All done purely accidentally. It was not intentional at all. All right. Well, thank you so much, Julie. Thank you so much, Andy. And thank you to our audience. As I say often, and I'm going to specify the what's worse, we need lots more of them. Challenge Andy. Challenge our guests. Challenge Mike Johnson. We greatly appreciate your contributions and for listening to the CISO Series podcast.
That wraps up another episode. If you haven't subscribed to the podcast, please do. We have lots more shows on our website, CISOseries.com. Please join us on Fridays for our live shows, Super Cyber Friday, our virtual meetup, and Cybersecurity Headlines Week in Review. This show thrives on your input. Go to the Participate menu on our site for plenty of ways to get involved, including recording a question or a comment for the show. If you're interested in sponsoring the podcast, contact David Spark directly at david@cisoseries.com. Thank you for listening to the CISO Series podcast.